Jake Murphy shuffled into Xenobiology 101 with all the enthusiasm of someone attending their own tax audit. The Galactic Academy's most prestigious lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as alien students from 17 different species fidgeted in their specially designed seats. Jake found a spot in the back row, plopped down next to what looked like a walking pile of purple jello, and immediately regretted not bringing coffee. Welcome, future xenobiologists, to the most crucial course in your academic careers, Professor Vextar announced, his 6 arms gesturing dramatically while his chrome-colored exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh classroom lights. The Zephyrian professor had the kind of voice that suggested he'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror, probably multiple times. Today, we begin our study of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, creatures so terrifying that entire civilizations have built their defense protocols around avoiding them. Jake yawned and pulled out his tablet, wondering if Earth Netflix worked through the Academy's quantum internet. Probably not, but a guy could hope. Now then, Vextar continued, pacing across the platform with the swagger of someone who clearly believed his own hype. I trust you've all completed the required psychological preparation modules. The Galactic Health Administration mandates these sessions because exposure to images of apex predators has been known to cause severe trauma in unprepared minds. Cleona, the Aquarian student sitting 2 seats over from Jake, raised one of her tentacles nervously. Professor, what if we experience panic attacks during the presentations? My therapist says my anxiety levels are already concerning. Excellent question, Miss Cleona. We have medical staff on standby, and emergency sedatives have been distributed to your seat compartments. Remember, what we're about to study represents the absolute pinnacle of evolutionary hostility. These creatures make our worst nightmares look like pleasant daydreams. Jake snorted softly. Back home, his biggest worry during biology class had been staying awake during Professor Henderson's lectures about mitochondria. This whole production felt like watching someone get worked up over a nature documentary. Sir, rumbled Grox, the rockoid student whose granite features somehow managed to convey deep concern. My people have legends about some of these beasts, stories that turned warriors to stone with fear. Are we certain the containment protocols are sufficient? Vextar's mandibles clicked in what Jake assumed was approval. Your caution is admirable, Mr. Grox. Yes, our holographic projectors are equipped with quantum isolation fields. Nothing can escape, and nothing can harm you. Physically, at least. Psychologically, well, that's why we have the medical team. The professor's 6 hands moved across his control console with theatrical precision. Today we begin with a creature so vicious, so utterly without mercy, that it single-handedly keeps 3 entire star systems uninhabited. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted biologics, I present the apex predator of the Kepler-7 system. The lights dimmed to an appropriately ominous level. Every alien student leaned forward in their seats, some already reaching for their emergency sedatives. Jake leaned back and wondered if the Academy cafeteria served anything resembling actual food. Behold, Vextar whispered dramatically, the Shadow Maw. The holographic projector hummed to life, casting a 3-dimensional image of a creature that made every alien in the room gasp audibly. Some covered their optical organs, others began hyperventilating. Cleona actually fainted, her tentacles going limp as she slumped in her chair. Jake looked at the projection, blinked twice, and raised his hand. Yes, Mr. Murphy, Vextar asked, clearly expecting either terror or awe. Professor? Back home, we call that a kitten. The silence that followed Jake's observation was the kind of quiet usually reserved for funeral services or really awkward dinner parties. Vextar's mandibles twitched in what might have been confusion, disbelief, or the early stages of a nervous breakdown. I beg your pardon? The professor managed, his voice climbing an octave higher than probably intended. Jake gestured casually at the holographic Shadow Maw, which was currently frozen mid-roar in all its supposedly terrifying glory. Yeah, that's basically a house cat. Bit bigger than average, sure, and the extra set of limbs is interesting, but look at those proportions. Classic feline bone structure. The hunting posture is textbook ambush predator. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson has a tabby that makes the exact same face when it's stalking pigeons. Cleona had recovered from her fainting spell just in time to start hyperventilating again. But the teeth! Look at those fangs! They're designed for ripping flesh from bone. Oh, those? Jake squinted at the projection. Yeah, cats have those too. Actually, come to think of it, this guy's got nothing on a tiger. Tigers are basically murder machines wrapped in pretty orange fur. We have documentaries about them. Kids watched them during lunch. Grox's rocky exterior was literally trembling. Human Jake, are you suggesting your species coexists with creatures of similar lethality? Coexists? Buddy, we keep them as pets. My sister has 3 cats. They sleep on her bed and knock things off her coffee table for fun. The most dangerous thing about them is the hairballs. Vexstar's exoskeleton had shifted from chrome to a distinctly greenish hue. Mr. Murphy, I think you're perhaps not grasping the scale of what you're observing. This creature stands 3 meters at the shoulder. Its bite force exceeds 12,000 psi. It can leap 40 meters horizontally and has been known to hunt in coordinated packs of up to 30 individuals. Jake nodded thoughtfully. So, like a really big cat, have you guys ever heard of lions? Because if you think pack hunting is scary, wait until I tell you about African wild dogs. Or better yet, wolves. Wolves figured out pack hunting about 40,000 years before humans invented agriculture, and we thought they were so cool we basically kidnapped some and turned them into golden retrievers. The purple jello creature next to Jake had been quietly oozing away from him throughout this conversation. Now it spoke in a voice like bubbles popping. You turned apex predators into companions? Well, yeah. Selective breeding is pretty neat. Give us a few thousand years and we can turn anything into something that fetches newspapers and does tricks for treats. We turned wolves into chihuahuas, for crying out loud. And pugs. Though, honestly, pugs might be proof that we occasionally get carried away with the whole genetic modification thing. Vexstar was now rapidly consulting his tablet, 6 arms flying across multiple screens simultaneously. The biological data doesn't support this claim. According to galactic standard, predator classifications, creatures of this magnitude require specialized military intervention. The suggested protocol for Shadow Maw encounters is immediate evacuation followed by orbital bombardment of the affected area. Orbital bombardment? Jake laughed, the sound causing several students to jump. For that thing? Dude, a spray bottle and a firm no would probably work fine. Maybe shake a bag of treats if you really want its attention. Trust me, I grew up with cats. This is just a cat with better marketing. Professor Vexstar stared at his human student for a long moment, then at the holographic Shadow Maw, then back at Jake. His mandibles clicked rapidly in what appeared to be some kind of processing loop. Perhaps, he said finally, his voice tight, with what might have been desperation, we should examine something with a bit more substance. Professor Vexstar's chrome exoskeleton had now shifted to an alarming shade of copper, which Jake figured was probably the Zephyrian equivalent of a stress rash. The professor's 6 arms moved frantically across his control console, pulling up what were clearly meant to be his greatest hits. Very well, Mr. Murphy. Perhaps the Shadow Maw was indeed too introductory for someone of your apparent expertise. The sarcasm dripped from his mandibles like honey from a broken jar. Let us examine something that has reduced seasoned space marines to gibbering wrecks. The hologram shifted, and a new creature materialized in the center of the classroom. This one was significantly larger, easily the size of a school bus, with a serpentine body covered in what looked like obsidian scales. It moved with a hypnotic, undulating motion that seemed to mesmerize every alien student. Several immediately reached for their emergency sedatives. Behold the Void Serpent of Rigel Prime, Vexstar announced, his voice regaining some of its theatrical confidence. Capable of crushing starship hulls in its coils with venom that can dissolve titanium, and a hunting strategy so sophisticated it can predict its prey's movements 17 steps in advance. Jake tilted his head, studying the creature with the casual interest of someone examining a mildly interesting cloud formation. Huh, that's a pretty big python. Clayona, who had just recovered from her earlier fainting spell, immediately started hyperventilating again. Python? What's a python? Snake, Jake explained helpfully. We've got loads of them back home. This one's bigger than usual, sure, but the hunting strategy isn't exactly revolutionary. Constrictors have been using ambush tactics for millions of years. My cousin Rick used to catch pythons in Florida for the wildlife department. Beer money, he called it. Rox's granite features somehow managed to convey existential confusion. Your cousin hunted creatures of this magnitude for recreational currency? Well, Florida pythons are usually smaller, but yeah, Rick always said the trick was grabbing them behind the head before they got their coils around you. Of course, he also said a lot of things after his 3rd beer, so your mileage may vary. Professor Vexstar's color had progressed to a distinct bronze shade. The Void Serpent's venom can dissolve metal, Mr. Murphy. So can stomach acid if you give it enough time. Plus, snakes usually only bite when they're scared or cornered. This guy looks pretty chill, actually. See how he's not in strike position? Probably just wants to find a nice sunny rock to nap on. The purple jello creature beside Jake made a sound like a deflating balloon. How are you not terrified? Look at the size of that thing. I mean, blue whales are bigger and they just eat krill all day. Size isn't everything in the Predator game. Jake paused thoughtfully. Though I'll give you points for the whole dissolves metal thing. That's pretty metal, pun intended. Vexstar was now cycling through colors like a broken mood ring. He dismissed the Void Serpent hologram with perhaps more force than necessary and pulled up his next presentation. Fine. Perhaps something with a bit more diversity in its threat profile. The new hologram showed creatures that looked like crystalline scorpions, each about the size of a motorcycle, with translucent bodies that sparkled with internal light. They moved in perfect synchronization, their crystalline claws clicking ominously. The crystal scorpions of Tau Ceti, Vexstar announced, desperation creeping into his voice. They hunt in hives of 10,000 individuals, can burrow through solid rock, and their stings inject quantum poison that exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Jake perked up slightly. Oh, those are pretty. Kind of like if you crossed a lobster with a disco ball. Every alien in the room turned to stare at him. Cleona's tentacles went rigid with shock. Lobster? Yeah, you know. Big claws, segmented body, lives in groups. We boil them and eat them with butter. They're delicious. These crystal guys probably taste amazing, assuming the quantum poison thing doesn't make them too spicy. Rocks made a sound like boulders grinding together. You consume creatures similar to these quantum-poisoned hive minds. Well, lobsters aren't quantum poisoned, but yeah, Red Lobster makes a fortune off the things. Though I guess these crystal scorpions might be a bit crunchy. Probably need a really good sauce. Professor Vexstar had now achieved a color that didn't exist in any known spectrum. Mr. Murphy, these creatures have been responsible for the extinction of 4 separate civilizations. That's rough, Jake acknowledged. Though to be fair, humans have probably driven more species extinct just by accident. We're really good at that. Not proud of it, but there it is. The professor's control console began sparking as his increasingly frantic inputs overloaded the system. Perhaps something more contemporary to your sensibilities. The hologram shifted once more, revealing sleek, panther-like creatures with fur that seemed to contain entire galaxies. They moved like liquid shadow, and their eyes burned with what appeared to be actual plasma. The plasma panthers of Andromeda Station, Vexstar practically shouted. Invisible to most detection systems, capable of phasing through solid matter, and they hunt by reading their prey's neural patterns to predict every possible escape route. Jake examined the creatures with genuine interest for the first time. Okay, those are actually pretty cool. Like cats, but with superpowers. Do they purr? The classroom door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and Captain Thorne strode in, wearing the kind of expression usually reserved for discovering someone had been using military-grade explosives for party fireworks. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her medals caught the light at precisely the right angle, and her general demeanor suggested she had exactly 0 patience for whatever nonsense was happening in her academy. Professor Vexter, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd probably faced down actual space pirates before breakfast. I'm receiving concerning reports from the medical bay. Something about mass sedative distribution and potential psychological trauma in your classroom. Vexstar's color had now progressed beyond any recognizable portion of the visible spectrum, and was venturing into what could only be described as radioactive anxiety. Captain Thorne, how fortuitous. Perhaps you could explain to our human exchange student the gravity of what we study here. Mr. Murphy seems to believe our apex predators are somehow comparable to Earth's domesticated fauna. Captain Thorne's gaze swept the classroom, taking in the scattered emergency sedative dispensers, Cleona's obviously frazzled tentacles, Grox's stress-fractured exterior, and Jake sitting calmly in the back row like he was waiting for a bus. Her eyes narrowed. Is that so? She looked directly at Jake, her expression unreadable. And what exactly has Professor Vexstar shown you, Mr. Murphy? Oh, you know. Space cats, a big snake, some fancy lobsters with glow-in-the-dark features. Pretty standard stuff, really. Jake shrugged. Though I'll admit the plasma panthers are kind of neat. Do you guys have any that actually purr, or is that more of a Earth cat thing? Captain Thorne's eyebrow twitched, almost imperceptibly, but Jake caught it. I see. And Professor Vexstar, you feel Mr. Murphy requires a more intensive educational experience? Vexter's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like a malfunctioning printer. Captain, The human clearly doesn't understand the threat level we're dealing with. Perhaps a demonstration using our live specimens would be more educational than mere holographic representations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Captain Thorne's voice became dangerously quiet. Professor, you are absolutely not suggesting we release a live apex predator in a classroom full of students. Not release, Vexstar protested, though his color had shifted to something that probably indicated he was considering exactly that. The containment cells have observation windows. Surely seeing a real creature in action would help Mr. Murphy appreciate the genuine danger these beings represent? Jake raised his hand again. Just to clarify, are we talking about a field trip to the zoo, or are you actually thinking about letting something loose in here? Because I should probably mention that my insurance doesn't cover mauled by alien space beast incidents. It would be perfectly safe, Vexstar insisted, though he was now consulting multiple datapads simultaneously, and his color had achieved a shade that probably violated several local light pollution ordinances. The containment protocols are absolute. Quantum-locked barriers, neural dampening fields, emergency stasis systems. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Captain Thorne stared at him with the kind of look that suggested she'd heard variations of "nothing could possibly go wrong" right before things went spectacularly wrong. Professor, I'm going to pretend you didn't just suggest exposing students to live apex predators because you're having an academic ego crisis. It's not an ego crisis, Vexstar's voice cracked slightly. It's about educational integrity. How can we properly study these creatures if our students don't respect their capabilities? The human thinks they're pets. Well, Jake interjected helpfully, I never said they'd make good pets. I just said they reminded me of Earth animals. There's a difference. Like, I wouldn't try to keep a tiger as a pet either, but that doesn't mean I'd run screaming if I saw one at a zoo. Rox shifted uncomfortably, his rocky exterior grinding slightly. Jake, human, perhaps your world's creatures are simply less dangerous than ours? Your evolutionary pressures may have been more mild? Jake considered this for a moment. I mean, we've got hippos. Those things kill more people per year than sharks, and sharks are basically swimming murder machines with excellent marketing departments. Oh, and geese. Never underestimate geese. They're like angry feathered demons with a grudge against the entire concept of peace. Cleona's tentacles drooped. Your world sounds terrifying. Nah, you just learned to work around the danger stuff. It's all about understanding animal behavior and keeping your distance from the bitey end of things. Captain Thorne watched this exchange with growing alarm. She'd read Jake's file, of course. Earth had submitted comprehensive biological data as part of the exchange program application. The problem was, most of it had been classified as obvious exaggeration by the Galactic Assessment Board, because no planet could possibly evolve that many different ways to die. Professor Vexter, meanwhile, had reached what appeared to be a complete psychological breaking point. His color had cycled through the entire spectrum twice, and was now settling on a shade that suggested imminent academic meltdown. Fine, he announced suddenly, his voice taking on the dangerous calm of someone who'd decided to burn their career down for the sake of proving a point. Captain Thorne, I formally request permission to access Containment Level 7 for educational purposes. Every alien in the room went dead silent. Even the purple jello creature stopped oozing. Captain Thorne's expression shifted from annoyed to genuinely alarmed. Professor, Level 7 containment houses the Dreadclaw Alpha. You cannot possibly be serious. The Dreadclaw Alpha? Vexstar's mandibles clicked with newfound determination. Oh yes, if Mr. Murphy believes our apex predators are simply oversized house pets, then perhaps he'd like to meet the creature that single-handedly ended the Regellian Empire. Jake perked up. Regellian Empire? What happened to them? The Dreadclaw Alpha ate them, Grox whispered, his granite voice barely audible. All of them. Entire planets. It's why we keep it in quantum stasis. Huh, Jake said thoughtfully. So like, a really big dinosaur? Professor Vexstar's laugh had an edge of hysteria to it. Mr. Murphy, you're about to find out exactly how big. What happened next would go down in Galactic Academy history as either the greatest educational disaster or the most effective practical demonstration ever recorded, depending on who you asked and how many drinks they'd had. Professor Vexstar's 6 arms moved across his console with the frenzied energy of someone who decided that tenure was overrated anyway. Emergency klaxons began wailing as quantum locks disengaged throughout the facility. Captain Thorne lunged for the override controls, but Vexstar had already initiated the transport sequence. Professor, stop! Thorne shouted over the alarms. That containment field wasn't designed for classroom use. Educational integrity demands authenticity, Vextar cried back, his voice now carrying the manic edge of someone who'd crossed the point of no return. Mr. Murphy needs to understand what real danger looks like. The air in the center of the classroom began to shimmer and distort. Reality folded in on itself like origami made of light and probability, and then something stepped through that made every previous creature look like a stuffed animal. The Dreadclaw Alpha was, Jake had to admit, genuinely impressive. It stood roughly 4 meters tall at the shoulder, with a build that suggested someone had taken a tiger, fed it nothing but protein shakes and rage for about 10,000 years, then given it armor plating and anger management issues. Its hide was matte black, with silver streaks that seemed to absorb light, and its claws were easily the length of baseball bats. When it opened its mouth to roar, Jake could see rows of teeth that belonged in a hardware store's power tool section. The creature's roar shook the walls and triggered every fire alarm in the building. Students scattered like bowling pins, screaming in languages Jake didn't recognize but whose meaning was pretty universal. Cleona fainted again, this time with enough force to knock over her desk. Grox, despite being made of literal rock, somehow managed to find a corner to cower in. Captain Thorne was shouting into her communicator about emergency containment protocols while simultaneously trying to evacuate terrified students. Professor Vextar stood frozen at his console, apparently realizing that his point-proving strategy had some significant flaws in its execution. The Dreadclaw Alpha swiveled its massive head, surveying the chaos with what appeared to be predatory satisfaction. Its gaze swept across the fleeing students, then the shouting adults, and finally settled on Jake, who was still sitting calmly in his seat, chin propped on his hand. "Well," Jake said conversationally, "you're certainly bigger than a house cat." The creature tilted its head, apparently confused by the lack of screaming or running. It took a step toward Jake, claws scoring deep gouges in the reinforced flooring. Jake stood up slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Easy there, big guy. I know this is all new and scary, but let's not do anything we'll regret later." The Dreadclaw Alpha paused, clearly not expecting this reaction. It was probably used to the immediate terror and fleeing that seemed to be standard operating procedure for most galactic species. "Yeah, I get it," Jake continued, reaching into his lunch bag with movements so casual they bordered on insulting. "New place, lots of weird smells, everyone's screaming. That's stressful. You're probably just hangry." He pulled out a sandwich and unwrapped it slowly. The creature's nostrils flared, and its head moved closer to investigate. "Turkey and Swiss," Jake explained. "Not sure if that's your thing, but the protein's decent." He tossed a piece of turkey toward the creature, which caught it with reflexes that would have impressed a professional athlete. The Dreadclaw Alpha chewed thoughtfully, then sat down with a thump that cracked the floor tiles. "There we go," Jake said approvingly. "Good boy. Or girl, sorry, hard to tell from here." He tossed another piece of turkey, which the creature caught with what might have been enthusiasm. Captain Thorne had stopped shouting into her communicator and was staring in open disbelief. "Mr. Murphy, what exactly are you doing?" "Basic animal psychology," Jake replied, offering the creature another piece of his sandwich. "Most aggressive behavior stems from fear, territorial disputes, or hunger. This guy just got yanked out of his nice quiet containment cell and dumped into a room full of screaming strangers. Of course he's agitated." The Dreadclaw Alpha had now laid down completely, its massive head resting on its front paws while it watched Jake hopefully. When Jake scratched behind where its ears would be if it had ears, the creature made a sound that was unmistakably a purr. An incredibly deep, bass-heavy purr that vibrated through the floor and probably triggered seismic sensors across the academy. But definitely a purr. "See?" Jake said to the stunned classroom. "Just needed someone to treat him like a living creature instead of a walking nightmare. Earth's been dealing with apex predators for millions of years. The trick is understanding what they actually want versus what you think they want." Professor Vextar had achieved a color that probably violated several laws of physics. But the Regellian Empire—" "Yeah, about that," Jake said, continuing to pet the now docile creature. "Did anyone ever try just asking it to stop? Because most predators don't actually want to destroy entire civilizations. That's a lot of work, and the calorie return is terrible. It was probably just scared and defending itself." The Dreadclaw Alpha rolled over onto its back, exposing its armored belly and looking for all the world like an enormous, galaxy-destroying puppy that wanted tummy rubs. "This is impossible," Vextar whispered. "The quantum stasis fields, the neural dampeners, the fear responses, they're evolutionary imperatives. You can't just pet them away." Jake shrugged, obligingly providing the requested belly rubs to a creature that had supposedly eaten an empire. Evolution's funny like that. On Earth, we learned pretty early that making friends with the scary stuff usually works better than running away from it. Wolves became dogs, wildcats became house cats, and apparently nightmare fuel becomes oversized lap pets, if you know what you're doing. Captain Thorne finally found her voice. Mr. Murphy, do you realize that creature has been in maximum security containment for over 2 centuries? 2 centuries? Jake looked genuinely sympathetic. No wonder he's grumpy. That's like solitary confinement. Anyone would develop behavioral issues. What he needs is socialization, regular exercise, and maybe some puzzle toys to keep his mind occupied. The Dreadclaw Alpha had begun making a new sound, somewhere between a purr and a rumble, while nuzzling Jake's hand with a head the size of a small car. Puzzle toys, Captain Thorne repeated faintly. Yeah, mental stimulation's important for intelligent predators, otherwise they get destructive. Kind of like how humans get weird if you lock them in small spaces for too long. Jake paused thoughtfully. Come to think of it, that might explain the whole Regelian Empire thing. How long was this guy loose before you caught him? 17 years, Vexstar whispered. 17 years of no social contact, no mental stimulation, probably no proper nutrition. Jake shook his head sadly. Yeah, that'll mess anyone up. Surprised he didn't eat more empires, honestly. The classroom had gone completely silent except for the Dreadclaw Alpha's contented purring and the distant sound of emergency crews responding to alarms throughout the facility. Students were slowly emerging from their hiding places, staring in wonder at the sight of the galaxy's most feared predator getting belly rubs from a human who'd been treating the whole situation like a minor inconvenience. So, Jake said to Captain Thorne, what's the Academy's policy on therapy animals? 3 hours later, the emergency response teams had finally stopped running around like their collective hair was on fire. The Dreadclaw Alpha, now officially renamed Buddy by Jake, despite formal protests from the Galactic Nomenclature Committee, was sprawled across half the classroom floor, snoring contentedly, while Jake used his massive flank as a backrest to finish his homework. Professor Vexstar sat in the corner, staring at his life's work with the hollow expression of someone who'd just discovered their doctoral thesis was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. His color had settled into a dull gray that probably indicated the Zephian equivalent of an existential crisis. 40 years, he mumbled to himself. 40 years of research into galactic apex predators, and a human from a backwater planet just pet them into submission. Captain Thorne finished her 15th report of the day and looked up from her datapad. Professor, the Galactic Council has officially requested that you take a sabbatical, effective immediately. They've also asked Mr. Murphy to consider a position as Senior Apex Predator Relations Specialist. Jake looked up from his xenobiology textbook, which he had been reading while using a universe-destroying monster as furniture. Does it come with dental? Because my Earth insurance definitely doesn't cover quantum dimension dental work. The position includes full medical, housing allowance, and access to the Academy's coffee synthesis lab, Thorne replied, consulting her notes. Also, the Galactic Council has voted to reclassify humans as a Class 10 biosafety hazard. Wait, what? Jake sat up straighter, inadvertently disturbing Buddy, who opened one massive eye and made a questioning rumble. Are they calling us dangerous? Not exactly. Captain Thorne's expression was carefully neutral. The classification is for species that pose an existential threat to established galactic understanding. Apparently, having humans around makes everything else seem significantly less threatening, which the Council considers potentially destabilizing to civilization as we know it. Cleona, who had finally stopped fainting long enough to participate in conversation, raised a tentacle nervously. Captain, does this mean humans will be taking over apex predator management galaxy-wide? The preliminary reports suggest that would be advisable, yes. Thorne scrolled through her datapad. Early projections indicate that human involvement could reduce apex predator-related casualties by approximately 97%, while simultaneously cutting containment costs by 85% and improving creature psychological health by measures we don't currently have adequate scales to quantify. Rox shifted his rocky bulk thoughtfully. So humans are not themselves apex predators, but rather apex predator therapists? That's one way to put it, Jake said, scratching Buddy behind his massive head ridges. The creature's purring had settled into a rhythm that was probably registering on geological survey equipment. Though back home we just call it common sense. Most animals aren't evil, they're just misunderstood. Even the scary ones usually just want food, shelter, and maybe someone to play fetch with. Professor Vexstar made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Fetch. The creature that destroyed the Regelian Empire wants to play fetch. I mean, probably, Jake said reasonably. Look at those legs, built for running and jumping. Bet he's got tons of energy with nowhere to put it. 2 centuries in a box would drive anyone nuts. What he needs is a good exercise program and maybe some puzzle feeders to keep his brain occupied. Captain Thorne was rapidly taking notes. Mr. Murphy, hypothetically speaking, how would you recommend we handle the other Level 7 containment subjects? Well, what've you got? Thorne consulted her list. The Void Kraken of Proxima, the Nightmare Swarm of Vega 4, the Living Storm of the Horsehead Nebula, and something called the Reality Eater that we're not entirely sure how to classify. Jake considered this. The Kraken's probably just lonely. Ocean predators usually are social creatures. The Nightmare Swarm sounds like it might need better communication protocols. Most hive minds just want to be understood. The Living Storm is interesting. That might be more of an environmental management issue than a creature problem. And the Reality Eater, he paused. Okay, that one might actually be a problem. What does it eat exactly? Reality, apparently. Right, yeah, we should probably leave that one in the box. Buddy chose that moment to roll over completely, ending up with his massive paws in the air and his tongue lolling out in what was unmistakably a doggy grin. Several students who had been cautiously returning to their seats immediately started taking pictures. Professor Vextar looked at his former symbol of ultimate terror, now resembling nothing so much as an oversized golden retriever with armor plating, and began laughing. Not the hysterical edge of breakdown laughter from before, but genuine, exhausted amusement. You know what the truly terrifying part is? He said to Captain Thorne. The human's probably right, about all of it. We've been so focused on containing and fearing these creatures that we never considered the possibility that they might just need better management. Captain Thorne nodded grimly. I'm filing a recommendation with the Galactic Defense Force that Earth be classified as a protected sanctuary world. Not for their protection, but for ours. If this is how humans handle our apex predators, I shudder to think what their actual apex predators are like. Jake looked up from where he was now engaged in what appeared to be a serious game of tug-of-war with Buddy, using his belt as a rope. Oh, you mean like bears? Or crocodiles? Actually, you should probably avoid Australia entirely. That whole continent is basically a practical joke that evolution played on the concept of safety. The color drained from Captain Thorne's face. Mr. Murphy, please tell me you're exaggerating. Well, Jake said thoughtfully, tugging his belt away from Buddy's gentle but massive jaws, I haven't even mentioned the drop bears yet. Professor Vextar had resumed his hysterical laughter. Captain Thorne was rapidly updating her report to recommend that the Galactic Council consider quarantining Earth's entire solar system. And Jake, oblivious to the minor diplomatic crisis he'd just triggered, was wondering if the Academy cafeteria served anything that might pass for pizza. So about that job offer, he said to Captain Thorne. Does it come with vacation time? Because I was thinking of visiting home for the holidays and I'd hate to miss Christmas dinner. Mom makes this amazing turkey and I bet Buddy here would love to meet the family dog. The sound Captain Thorne made wasn't quite a scream, but it was close.